The bite didn't hurt. That's the first thing nobody tells you. When something truly wrong happens to your body, something that shouldn't be possible, your brain just pauses, like a loading screen, like the universe itself needs a second to process what just occurred. I didn't scream. I didn't even move. I just stood there in the middle of Sector 7's lower transit corridor, 40 feet underground, surrounded by the hum of magrail engines and the smell of recycled ozone. And I thought, that's strange. My neck is very cold. Then she pulled back, and I saw her eyes. And that's when I understood that my life, the ordinary, unremarkable, moderately disappointing life I had built for myself over 31 years, was completely, permanently, irreversibly over. Set up the world. Let me back up. This is 2187, or at least, that's what the Transit Authority timestamps say. The rest of the world just calls it now. Because honestly, what does a year even mean anymore when you're living inside a city that never fully sleeps, never fully wakes, and runs on a power grid partially fed by a captured fragment of a dying star 17 kilometers above the cloud layer? The city is called Vale. Not a name I would have chosen, but nobody asked me. Vale is what happens when 3 separate corporate megastructures decide to merge their residential towers, their commercial zones, and their atmospheric processors into a single living organism. It breathes. It shifts. On clear nights, rare, but they happen, you can stand on the upper observation decks and watch the whole thing exhale. Watch the condensation roll off the ventilation arrays in long silver rivers. Watch the bioluminescent panels on the eastern face cycle through their nightly color sequence. It's beautiful, I guess, if you can afford to live high enough to see it. I couldn't. I lived in the lowers, floor 14 through floor 22 in Block 9G, which is the city's polite way of saying underground adjacent. Not fully underground. There are actual subterranean levels below us that make my apartment look like a penthouse by comparison, but close enough that the artificial lighting runs 24 hours because real sunlight doesn't reach us. Close enough that the air always tastes faintly of recycled processing fluid, and whatever the vertical farms on floor 17 are growing this season. This week, apparently, it was something with a lot of chlorophyll. The whole corridor smelled like a greenhouse left to run wild. I worked in systems maintenance. Unglamorous, necessary, invisible, the way all truly essential things are invisible until they break. My job was to monitor the diagnostic feeds from Vale's internal transit network, the magrail lines, the pneumatic lift shafts, the pedestrian pressure corridors, and flag anything that looked like it was drifting outside normal parameters. Mostly I sat in a small room on floor 18 and drank terrible synth coffee and watched numbers. Sometimes the numbers did something interesting. Usually they didn't. My name is Kale Voss. I'm 31 years old. I have dark hair that I keep meaning to cut. I own 2 good jackets and 1 bad one. I've been told I have a face that looks like it's always slightly worried about something, which is accurate because I usually am. That's who I was the night it happened. Ordinary, a little tired, carrying a thermos of terrible synth coffee and heading home on the 23:40 transit run after a 12-hour diagnostic shift. Just a person. Just background. Just another face in the lower transit corridor, moving through the blue-white pulse of the overhead panels, shoulders slightly hunched, thinking about absolutely nothing in particular. And then everything changed. The lower transit corridor for Sector 7 runs roughly east to west beneath the commercial district, connecting the maintenance hubs to the residential blocks. At 23:40 on a non-rest day, it's not empty, but it's not busy either. You get shift workers, delivery operators, a few service drones running late route corrections, the occasional system patrol unit doing its slow, predictable sweep. That night, there were maybe 30 people spread across the length of the corridor. I remember the lighting first. That blue-white pulse I mentioned, it wasn't pulsing right. It was doing something slightly slower than normal. Not so slow that most people would notice. But I work in systems maintenance. I notice. I filed it away as something to log in the morning and kept walking. I remember the sound second. The mag rail hum is constant down there. You stop hearing it after a few weeks the same way you stop hearing your own heartbeat. But that night the pitch was slightly off. A half tone lower than normal, subtle, like a musical instrument slightly out of tune. Both small anomalies. I should have turned around. I didn't. I kept walking. And somewhere around the midpoint of the corridor, right below the junction where transit lines 7 and 12 cross above the pedestrian level, I passed a woman standing very still against the left wall. People stand still in corridors. It's not a crime. You check your personal feed, you wait for someone, you zone out for a second. I didn't even really look at her. Except something made me slow down. I don't know what it was. I've tried to identify it in the years since. The closest I can get is, she was still in a way that living things aren't usually still. Not statues still. Not sleeping still. Something else. Something that my brain recognized before my eyes did, before my conscious mind had even formed a thought about it. She was still the way a predator is still before it moves. I was close enough to see her properly now. She was tall. Not extraordinarily, maybe a few centimeters taller than me, but she held herself with the kind of posture that made her feel taller. Dark hair pulled back, though pieces of it had come loose and hung forward. Pale skin, not unnaturally pale, not at first glance, just the ordinary pallor of someone who, like most people in the lowers, hadn't seen real sunlight in a while. She was wearing a long coat, dark gray, the kind with the thermal regulation panels that were common about 15 years ago but you don't see much anymore. Her eyes were closed. That's what I was staring at, I realized. Her eyes were closed and her head was tilted back slightly, and she was breathing, slowly, rhythmically, like she was listening to something only she could hear. I should have walked past. I almost did. But then she opened her eyes. And they were gold. Not figuratively gold. Not the amber hazel that gets called gold by people trying to be poetic. I mean actual gold, bright, metallic, luminous, the color of old circuit boards when the light hits them just right. They caught the blue-white overhead light and threw it back differently, warmer, like something burning low and steady behind her irises. She looked directly at me. I stopped walking. She didn't smile. She didn't speak. She just looked at me with those gold eyes, and something happened in the air between us. I don't have a better word for it, like a pressure change. Like the moment before a storm when the atmosphere itself seems to hold its breath. "You're going the wrong way," she said. Her voice was low, precise, each word placed carefully, like she was selecting them from a very specific inventory. "Sorry," I said. "The wrong way," she repeated. "You shouldn't be in this corridor tonight." I looked around. The other people in the corridor were still walking, still going about their business. Nobody else had stopped. "I live this way," I said. Brilliant response. Really showed the depth of my social skills. She tilted her head slightly, studying me, like she was confirming something she already suspected. "Yes," she said, "I know." And then, faster than I could process, faster than a human being should have been able to move, she stepped forward. Her hand came up and braced against the wall beside me, and I felt her against my shoulder, my neck. Cold. A sharp, precise, burning cold. And then nothing, the loading screen. The universe pausing to process. I said the bite didn't hurt. That's not entirely accurate. It didn't hurt the way you expect things to hurt. There was no searing pain, no shock of injury. It was more like cold fire, like someone had pressed ice against your skin and the ice was also somehow burning. The sensation spread from the point of contact outward in slow waves, moving down my shoulder, up toward my jaw, across my collarbone. I didn't fall. I remember being surprised by that. I thought I would fall. Instead, I just stood there against the wall while she did whatever she was doing, and I stared up at the blue-white overhead panels doing their slow, wrong pulse, and I thought, with extraordinary clarity, I am going to die in this corridor, and nobody is going to notice for at least 3 minutes. Then she stepped back, and I looked at her, and she was staring at me like I had done something impossible. Her gold eyes were wide. Not frightened, she didn't look like someone who frightened easily, but surprised. Genuinely, deeply surprised in a way that seemed unfamiliar to her, like surprise was a sensation she didn't often have to navigate. She looked down at her hand. She looked back at me. She said very quietly, barely above a whisper, "That's not possible." I touched my neck. My hand came away with a small smear of something dark, not much, less than I expected. "What did you just do to me?" I said. My voice was surprisingly steady. I was proud of that, in the distant, shock-muffled way you can be proud of small things when larger things are falling apart. She didn't answer right away. She was still staring at me, still doing that study, that careful inventory of my face, my posture, my existence. "You should be on the ground," she said. "Yeah," I said, "I got that impression." "The venom," she said slowly, like she was working through it herself in real time. Your system should have," she stopped, started again. "How are you standing?" "I have no idea," I said honestly. "What's happening to my neck?" She reached out slowly this time, not the blurred speed from before, and touched my neck with 2 fingers. Gently. The cold was still there in her touch, but different, more controlled, more deliberate. She pressed her fingers to the bite mark, and I felt something happen. A warmth spreading inward from her fingers, moving against the cold fire sensation, pushing it back slightly. "I'm stopping the spread," she said quietly. "Just be still." "Sure," I said. "Stopping the spread of what?" "Of me," she said, which was not a reassuring answer. I didn't pass out. I keep coming back to that because, by every account I've been able to research in the years since, every historical record, every documented case, every fragment of information I've managed to pull from sources I'm not going to name, because most of them are not exactly public. A person who receives a full venom transfer from a kin is supposed to lose consciousness within approximately 90 seconds. I stood there for at least 8 minutes. I know because there's a transit authority surveillance timestamp. I've seen it. She's visible in the corner of the frame, just barely, just enough to confirm she was real and I didn't hallucinate the whole thing, and I'm standing there, and time is passing, and I'm not falling. The kin are what the government briefings call them, when the government bothers to acknowledge them at all, which it does only rarely and always in language so deliberately vague, it tells you more about what they're trying to hide than what they're trying to say. They are old. That's the most accurate thing I can tell you. How old is a conversation I'm still not equipped to have, because the numbers don't process correctly in a human brain. Numbers that large, stretching back before Veil, before the corporate merge, before the star fragment capture, before any of the history I was taught in school, those numbers just turn into abstraction. They become mythological. They stop being real. They've always been here, in the city, moving through it, underneath it in some cases quite literally. They maintain their own systems, their own hierarchies, their own territories, mostly separate from human infrastructure and human politics. Occasionally the two worlds intersect, usually badly. Her name, I would learn later, was Seraphiel. That night, in the corridor, she didn't tell me her name. That night she just kept her fingers pressed to my neck and stared at me like I was an anomaly she needed to classify. And gradually, Very gradually, the cold fire sensation faded from a roar to a simmer. "It's not spreading," she said. She sounded almost annoyed, not at me, at the situation. "It's receding." "Is that good?" I asked. "It's impossible," she said. "Right, but on the scale of good to bad." "I don't know yet." She finally dropped her hand, stepped back, put distance between us with a deliberateness that told me she was making a conscious choice to do so. "You need to go home. Lock your door. Don't use the lower corridors for the next 72 hours. I work in the lower corridors." "Then call in sick." "I can't just." "I will explain," she said, and her voice carried a weight I hadn't heard in it yet, something beneath the words that vibrated at a frequency I felt more than heard. "When I understand it myself. Right now I need you to trust me enough to go home." I looked at her. She looked at me. The overhead panels did their slow, wrong pulse. "What's your name?" I said. She paused just slightly. "Seraphil," she said. "Kale," I said. Something moved across her face, quick and then gone. "I know," she said. And she turned and walked away into the corridor, and the darkness took her the way darkness always seems to take people like her, not gradually, but all at once, as if she'd simply stepped through a door that wasn't visible from my side. I stood there for another minute. Then I went home. Building tension, the Venom. The next 3 days were the strangest of my life, and I include in that comparison the day I discovered my building's atmospheric processor had been accidentally reconfigured to produce a mild euphoria-inducing gas mixture, which had caused my entire floor to spend 6 hours in a state of pleasant confusion that nobody would fully explain afterward. The bite mark was not what I expected. I'd braced for swelling, infection. The spreading black vein discoloration I'd seen referenced in some of the darker corners of Vale's information networks. The kind of sites that are technically accessible but that your personal feed flags as unverified community speculation in big yellow text, as if that's going to stop anyone. Instead it looked healed. Not fresh healed, not recently closed wound healed. Actually, genuinely, completely healed, as if it had been there for weeks and was now just a faint memory on the skin. 2 small marks, barely visible against my neck, already fading. I took 12 photographs over the first 24 hours and watched them diminish. That wasn't supposed to happen. The venom of the kin, and here I'm drawing on the community speculation sites, because this is not information the transit authority puts in its public safety bulletins, does one of 3 things to a human host. The first outcome is rapid system failure, which is exactly as bad as it sounds and happens most often when the transfer is accidental or when the human's biology is particularly incompatible. The second outcome is conversion, the beginning of the long, painful, partially understood biological process that makes a human into something adjacent to kin. The third outcome is thrall, a partial chemical dependency that leaves the human functional but systematically altered, drawn back to the specific kin whose venom they carry. None of those 3 outcomes involves the venom simply stopping. Receding, she had said. My body had pushed it back. I sat at my small kitchen table on the evening of the second day, drinking actual coffee. I'd bought a real bag, the expensive kind, because I felt like I'd earned it. And I spread out everything I've been able to find about kin biology and venom mechanics over the past 36 hours. And I read it all twice. And I came to the conclusion that I was, medically speaking, a complete mystery. My comm pinged at 22:17. Unknown sender, no identification attached, just a text line. You haven't left your apartment. I stared at it. Typed back, how do you know that? A pause, then I can still sense you, some residue from the transfer, it fades. But for now I can tell you're in your apartment, floor 14, 3rd window from the north end. I looked at my window. Then I typed, That's not unsettling at all. Another pause, longer this time. I told you to stay home. You're doing that good. Are you watching my building? No. Are you sure? Yes, I'm several kilometers from you. The sense doesn't require proximity. It's more like knowing which direction a sound came from, even after the sound has stopped. I thought about that. Then I typed, the venom is gone, the marks are almost healed. A very long pause this time, long enough that I thought she wasn't going to respond. Then I know, I can feel it from here, or rather I can feel the absence of it. That's never happened before. Never. In 412 years, I have never had a transfer recede. I put down my coffee. 412 years. The number sat there in my kitchen and refused to be abstract. What does that mean? I typed. I don't know yet, she answered, but I'm going to find out. She came to my door on the third night. Not late, earlier than I expected, around 20:30, just as the artificial lighting in the corridor outside was cycling through its evening color shift. She knocked 3 times, and the knocks were precise and unhurried, the kind of knock that doesn't have any anxiety in it because the person on the other side of the door has never had much reason to feel anxious about doors. I opened it. She looked exactly as I remembered, the long gray coat. The dark hair slightly more carefully arranged this time. The gold eyes, which in the yellow evening light of my doorway looked different, warmer, somehow less startling. Still impossible, just warmer. I know this is uncomfortable, she said. My neck feels fine, I said. I'm not talking about your neck. We looked at each other. Do you want to come in? I said. She considered it, which was interesting. She hadn't struck me as someone who hesitated. Yes, she said. I stepped back, she walked in. She stood in the center of my small living area, 2-room apartment, low ceilings, the particular beige of corporation-approved residential walls, and she looked around at it with an expression that was difficult to read. Not contempt, not pity, something more like orientation. Like she was noting the coordinates of a new location. Sit down, I said, because somebody had to. She sat straight-backed, coat still on, hands folded in her lap. I sat across from her and waited. There are, she began, and then stopped. And the stopping surprised me because I'd already identified her as someone who was economical with words, who said what she meant and didn't fumble around looking for it. But she was fumbling now, just slightly. There are things I should explain before anything else. That would be great, I said. She looked at me, the gold eyes steady. My kind carry a biological marker, she said. In the venom, an identifier essentially. When we transfer to a human host, when that transfer completes, the host carries that marker, indefinitely. It's how we recognize territory, family lines, agreements between courts. Okay, I said, that sounds feudal. It is somewhat, she said without any apology. The world I exist in is older than the world you exist in. It hasn't changed at the same pace. Fair, I said, so the venom marks territory. Among other things, she paused again. When it recedes, when a human body actively rejects the marker, it's not simply a medical anomaly. In my world, there is only one documented reason it happens. I waited. She met my eyes directly. The only humans who have ever rejected kin venom are those who carry a compatible resonance signature, a biological echo of our own, ancient, very rare. The kind of thing that appears once in several human generations, if that. I processed this. So my body rejected it because we're compatible, biologically. Not compatible, she said carefully. That's not quite the right word. She seemed to be doing something internally, selecting words from that precise inventory. In my culture, in the oldest parts of it, there is a concept called Darville. She paused. Darville means most closely the one who reflects, The one whose pattern was created adjacent to yours in whatever process created both of you. Not a match, not a complement, more like an echo, a resonance. I was very still. You're telling me, I said slowly, that your culture has a concept that roughly translates to soulmates. She looked genuinely pained. That word, she said, is doing a great deal of simplification to a very complex. But broadly, I said. A very long pause. Broadly, she said, yes. Part 2, the kin and the living. The CORTS of VAL. I didn't sleep much that night. She left around midnight, stood up, said she would return, didn't ask if that was acceptable, which was annoying. But she did pause at the door and say, I know this is a great deal to receive at once. I'm aware that your world and mine don't usually intersect this directly. That's a very diplomatic way of describing the thing where you bit me, I said. Something happened at the corner of her mouth, almost a smile, not quite. Yes, she said, it is. Then she was gone. I sat in my apartment for a long time after that, looking at the city outside my small window. The glow of the upper levels visible even from down here, that soft ambient light that never fully goes dark. The magrail traffic above visible as streaks of blue-white moving through the middle distance. The ventilation arrays cycling. The vertical farm on floor 17 running its midnight irrigation sequence, audible through the wall as a faint rhythmic hiss. Vale, my city, the only city I'd ever known. And somewhere beneath it, in the actual subterranean levels I'd only heard about, in the places that don't show up on the transit authority maps, in the spaces the corporate infrastructure had simply built around and never built through because on some level even the architects had understood that some foundations were not theirs to disturb. There were people. People was maybe not the right word. There were the kin. Living their 400-year lives. Running their ancient courts. And one of them had just sat in my corporation beige living room and told me, with the careful precision of someone choosing every word from a very particular inventory, that I might be something she'd never encountered in 4 centuries of existence. I finally fell asleep around 3 a.m., half sitting in my chair. I dreamed about gold eyes in a dark corridor. She came back the next evening. And the evening after that. And within 2 weeks, she was simply coming every evening, arriving around 20:30, and we would sit across from each other at my small kitchen table. I'd bought 2 proper mugs by that point, and she didn't drink coffee, but she held the mug anyway, for the warmth, she said, and she would tell me things. About the kin. About Vale's understructure. About the world that ran parallel to mine, in the same city, under the same artificial sky. I learned that the kin courts operated on a structure that was, as she had suggested, genuinely feudal. There were 3 major courts in Vale. The Dawnless Court, which controlled the subterranean eastern quadrant. The Court of Accumulated Hours, which occupied a series of converted maintenance chambers in the northwest sector. And the Pale Accord, which was the oldest and least formally structured of the 3, and which Seraphiel belonged to. The Pale Accord is more of a loose alignment, she said one evening, choosing her words carefully. Not a court in the formal sense, more a collection of individuals who have agreed to certain principles and who acknowledge each other's autonomy within those principles. Anarchists, I said. She considered this. Principled individualists, she said. That's what anarchists say, I said. The almost smile again. It was happening more frequently by then. I had started cataloging its variations. The smallest one, just the very corner of the right side of her mouth, meant she found something genuinely amusing but wasn't ready to concede the point. The slightly larger one meant she'd decided to concede it. This time it was the slightly larger one. Perhaps, she said. The kin, she explained, had been in Vale since before Vale was Vale, since before the corporate merge, since before most of the city was built. They had watched it grow around them. It's strange, she said one night, staring at the coffee she wasn't drinking. To watch a city build itself in layers. To see what was open land become a transit hub, become a commercial district, become 3 levels of residential stacking, become what it is now. She was quiet for a moment. The transit corridor where we met. There was a river there once, in the deep geology, before the magrail shafts were bored through, before the corporate mapping teams came through with their scanners and their efficiency algorithms. A river, I said. Small but alive, it ran east to west, the way the corridor does now. She looked up. Some things persist as echoes. I thought about the half-tone lower hum of the magrail that night, the slow, wrong pulse of the lighting. Was that you? I said. The anomalies in the corridor systems. She didn't answer right away. The kin exist in a particular relationship with electrical systems, she said carefully. High concentrations of us can affect power flows, electromagnetic fields, the more sensitive monitoring equipment. We try to minimize it. But sometimes, especially when something unexpected is happening, the control slips. Something unexpected, I said, like finding your Darville in a maintenance worker on the night transit run. The word had started feeling less impossible to say, only slightly, but slightly. Yes, she said quietly, like that. She told me about the Venom mechanics more thoroughly on the 5th evening, when I asked directly, and she'd stopped pretending I wasn't going to. The biological transfer system of the kin was as far as any external science had managed to document, which wasn't far, because the kin controlled access to information about themselves with the careful precision of any sufficiently ancient institution that had learned the hard way what happens when outsiders get curious. Not a simple predatory mechanism. It was, she said, a communication system. The Venom carried information. Markers, as she'd said, but more than simple territorial identification. It carried a chemical record of the specific kin who produced it, their history, their lineage, their accumulated biological identity over however many centuries they'd existed. When it transferred to a human host, it was writing that record into a new substrate. It's how we maintain connection, she said. How we track chosen individuals across the city. How we form what you might call obligations, commitments between kin and the humans who are significant to them. And when it recedes, I said. When it recedes, the substrate rejected the writing, which means the substrate carries its own writing, its own record, something that is incompatible with being overwritten. She paused. Or, in the case of Darville, compatible in a specific way. The two records recognize each other, neither overwrites, neither submits. They just coexist. Or they do something more interesting, she said. I looked at her. She was looking at the table. What's more interesting, I said. She was quiet for a moment. There are old accounts, she said. Very old, from before any of the courts as they currently exist, from when the kin were fewer in number and the relationship between our kind and human populations was, she paused, chose the next word with particular care. Different, less distant. In those accounts, a Darville pairing, when the two actually made contact, when the resonance completed, was said to create something new in both parties. What kind of something new? She finally looked up. Something neither party was before, she said. Climax, the thing that came looking. 3 weeks after the corridor. I was at work. 12-hour diagnostic shift, same as always, sitting in my small monitoring room on floor 18, watching numbers that were, for once, behaving themselves. The magrail feeds were clean. The pressure corridors were all within tolerance. Even the vertical farm irrigation had stopped its midnight irregularity. I'd started noticing things, though, in the feeds. Small things. The kind of thing I would not have noticed before the corridor, before Seraphil, before the past 3 weeks of learning to see the city's infrastructure the way the kin saw it, as a living thing with breathing patterns. There were irregularities in Sector 3's eastern junction. Subtle ones, not the kind that would flag in an automated system below the threshold for alert generation, but real, power draw slightly elevated in 3 adjacent subsections, pressure in the maintenance passages slightly depressed. The electromagnetic readings from the junction monitoring array, the most sensitive equipment in the network, calibrated to detect interference from any source, doing a kind of low-level shimmer that I'd only seen before when. My comm pinged. Seraphiel, don't go to Sector 3 today. I stared at it. Typed back, what's in Sector 3? A pause. Something that was looking for you before I was. A longer pause. And didn't have my reasons for stopping. I set down my synth coffee, back to the terrible stuff at work. The good coffee was for home now, and looked at my monitoring feeds with new eyes. The irregularities in Sector 3's Eastern Junction were moving. Slowly but directionally. Moving through the subsections in a pattern that, if I extrapolated it forward along the transit grid, it was heading toward floor 18. Heading toward my monitoring room. Hey, I said to my colleague Bryn, who sat at the adjacent station and who spent approximately 40% of her shift playing card games on her secondary screen and who was, I had always maintained, significantly smarter than she let on. Have you noticed anything weird in the Sector 3 feeds? Bryn glanced at her screen. Bit of electromagnetic shimmer in the Eastern Junction, she said without missing a beat. I was going to flag it at end of shift, not above threshold. No, I said, but it's directional. She looked up at me. Then she looked back at her screen, properly this time, not card game checking. She ran a quick pattern analysis and watched the result render. Huh, she said. Yeah, I said. That's moving, she said. Yeah. She looked at me. Bryn had very sharp eyes. She had the face of someone who'd made a deliberate choice to appear less perceptive than she was, which meant when she actually looked at you directly, it carried weight. You look like you know what it is. I might, I said. Is it dangerous? Possibly. Should we call the patrol units? I thought about that. The patrol units were standard city security, human operators, automated enforcement drones, the occasional contract agency officer. They were equipped for a lot of things. The kinds of things that appeared in transit authority safety briefings and corporate incident reports. They were not equipped for this. No, I said, I need to make a call. I stepped out into the corridor outside the monitoring room and typed to Seraphiel. Whatever it is, it's about 3 subsections from my floor. I'm telling you now. Her response came back almost instantly. Don't move from where you are, I'm coming. How long? 4 minutes. That seems fast for several kilometers. I lied about how far away I was. She didn't come through the door. I want to be very specific about this, because it matters for everything that came after. She did not use the transit corridor, or the lift shafts, or any of the officially documented movement infrastructure of floor 18. The wall at the far end of the corridor outside my monitoring room had a maintenance access panel, a small, recessed, barely visible panel that gave access to the thermal regulation conduit running between floor 17 and floor 18. It was a tight space. A human would have had to seriously commit to getting through it. The panel opened from the inside. She came through it like she'd been folded into a smaller dimension and simply unfolded on the other side. One moment it was an unremarkable wall panel. The next moment it wasn't. She was moving fast, that blurred-edge movement from the corridor, but sustained, not a brief lunge but an actual running pace that made watching her travel the length of the corridor toward me very strange, like a time lapse. She arrived in front of me and stopped with complete stillness, from full speed to motionless in less than a step. Her eyes were brighter, the gold more intense, More of that circuit board quality, the burning low and steady sensation amplified. "Inside," she said, "your monitoring room. My colleague is in there." "I know, that's where we're going." She put a hand on my shoulder, the grip firm, not rough, and guided me back toward the door. "I need walls with existing signal protection, your equipment shielding. It'll disrupt the trace." "The trace," I said. "What's tracing me?" "In a moment," she said. We went back into the monitoring room. Bryn looked up from her screen. She'd been tracking the Sector 3 anomaly. I could see it on her display, and saw Sarah feel, and her very sharp eyes went through several rapid recalibrations. "Is this your call?" Bryn said to me. "Yes," I said. "Okay," Bryn said, with the specific calm of someone who had decided that asking questions could wait until the situation was less unclear. She turned back to her screen. Then, after a pause, the shimmer pattern stopped. About 30 seconds ago, it just stopped moving. Seraphiel stood against the far wall of the monitoring room, very still, eyes closed. The same posture as in the corridor the first night. Listening to something only she could hear. "It's not gone," she said. "It's waiting." "Waiting for what?" I said. "For me to leave you alone again." She opened her eyes. "There's a kin from the Dawnless Court in Sector 3. Their operative, a tracer, essentially. Their function is identification of unclaimed humans who carry trace resonance." "Unclaimed," I said. She met my eyes. "Before 3 weeks ago, before I found you, you would have appeared on a Dawnless Court scan as an unclaimed high-resonance human, an unusual reading, something worth investigating. And now you carry enough residual trace from my transfer to read as associated." "Associated," I said. "With me." "Is that why the tracer stopped?" "They recognized my signature in yours. The Pale Accord and the Dawnless Court have arrangements, territorial recognition. They won't approach someone who reads as Pale Accord affiliated without cause." I was processing all of this. "So they would have found me first," I said. If the corridor hadn't happened, they were already looking." "They scan the lower sectors regularly," she said, "looking for high-resonance humans, for potential thrall candidates, for—" She stopped. "For what?" A pause. "The Dawnless Court has been building its numbers for a long time," she said carefully, "adding compliant humans to its network. Not converts. The full conversion is too slow, too uncertain. Thralls. Humans who carry the venom and are consequently guided. Made useful." "Made useful," Bryn said from her station, without turning around. "That's a very clean way to say enslaved." Seraphiel looked at the back of Bryn's head. "Yes," she said quietly, "it is." The Sector 3 tracer left the transit network feeds around 23:00 that night. Bryn tracked it to the edge of the Dawnless Court's eastern territory and then lost the signal. Gone. But not, as Seraphiel pointed out, for good. "They'll file a report," she said. We were back in my apartment by then, the familiar positions, her side of the table, my side, the mugs that had become routine enough to stop being remarkable. "They'll note a high-resonance human in Sector 7 lowers, reading as Pale Accord affiliated. They'll want clarification." "Clarification from you," I said. "From the Accord as a whole. The Accord has a spokesperson for intercourt relations." A slight pause. "That would be me." "You're the spokesperson." "Someone has to be." "I thought you were principled individualists." "Even principled individualists occasionally need someone to talk to the feudal courts on their behalf," she said, and this time it wasn't the almost smile. It was an actual full small smile, brief, surprised-looking, like it had escaped before she decided whether to let it out. I stared at it. She noticed and it disappeared. "The Dawnless Court is going to ask questions," she said, returning to steady ground. "About you. About why someone with your resonance signature is reading as affiliated with the Accord. What are you going to tell them? She was quiet for a moment. I'm going to tell them the truth, she said. Which is? Her gold eyes steady. That you're mine, she said, and then quickly before I could react, not in the possessive sense, not the way the dawnless court uses that word. In they she stopped, tried again. In the Darvel sense. I held very still. You're going to tell the feudal vampire court that I'm your soulmate, I said. That word, she said, with exquisite patience, is doing a great deal of simplification. You're going to tell them that. A long pause. Yes, she said. And will they believe you? If they run a resonance scan, she said, they won't have a choice. Part 3. What the resonance means. The Accord. The formal meeting with the Dawnless Court was 8 days later. In that time, 3 things happened that I should document before I get to the meeting itself, because they matter for understanding what happened there. The first thing, Bryn. The morning after the Sector 3 incident, Bryn arrived at the monitoring station before I did, which never happened. She was famously a slow starter. She had a whole system for it. And when I walked in, she was sitting at her station with 2 actual coffees, the real kind, and she pointed at one and said, "Sit down. Talk." So I did. I told her not everything, but enough. Enough to explain the woman who had come through the maintenance panel. Enough to explain why the Sector 3 readings had behaved the way they did. Enough to explain why I had, over the past 3 weeks, been slightly distracted and slightly not myself, and why my neck had been slightly marked for about 5 days before it healed completely. Bryn listened to all of it without speaking. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "So when I ran that electromagnetic pattern analysis yesterday, and it came back as a moving directional trace, I was actually mapping a vampire stalking you through the lower transit grid." "The kin prefer," I started. "I'm using the word I want to use," she said, not unkindly. "Fair," I said. "And the one who came through the maintenance panel," she said. "The one with the gold eyes." "You noticed the eyes?" "They were extremely noticeable, Kale." "Yeah." "She's the one who bit you." "Yes." "And now she's claiming you're her destiny." I thought about the specific words Seraphiel had used, the careful precision of them. That's a simplification of a very complex. "So yes," Bryn said. Broadly, I said, "Yes." Bryn drank her coffee. "All right," she said. "I'm not going to pretend this doesn't raise a large number of questions, but I'm also going to trust that you know what you're doing. Do you know what you're doing?" "Approximately," I said. "Good enough," she said. The second thing, the resonance scan. Seraphiel had mentioned it as something the Dawnless Court could demand, a verification of the Darvel claim. I'd asked her what it involved. She'd been slightly evasive about that, which I'd filed under things she'll explain when she's ready. On the 4th day after the corridor incident, I'd started counting from there. It had become my personal calendar system. Before corridor and after corridor, she sat at my kitchen table and explained the scan. It required proximity. It required both parties present, and she had paused a lot during this explanation. It required a secondary transfer. Not a bite. Not venom. A contact resonance. Both parties holding still, close, while the biological frequency between them was measured by someone sensitive enough to read it. A kin elder in formal contexts. Or, in less formal contexts, Seraphiel herself could read it from my side, and I hear she had paused longest. I could apparently read it from hers. "How?" I'd said. "The residual from the first transfer," she said. "Even though the venom receded, it left a door, essentially, open just slightly. You have the capacity to perceive the kin frequency. Not completely, not the way we perceive each other, but enough." "Enough for what?" She looked at me. Enough to know, she said quietly, if what I believe about you is true. I hadn't pushed that evening, but I thought about it for the remaining days before the meeting, and on the night before I lay awake in my apartment and tried, deliberately, consciously, to feel whatever the door was. And something was there. Not vision, not sound, not any sense I had an existing name for, more like orientation, like knowing without looking which direction north was. A constant, low, uninsistent signal pointing in the direction of wherever Seraphiel currently was. I lay there and felt it and understood, for the first time with real physical evidence, that 3 weeks ago the world had changed in a way I hadn't chosen and couldn't undo. And I realized, somewhere in the 2 a.m. quiet of my floor 14 apartment, with the vertical farm hissing through the wall and the mag rail humming its constant note above, that I wasn't entirely sure I wanted to undo it. That was the second thing. The third thing was simpler. I went to Bryn's station the morning of the meeting and I said, if I'm not back by end of shift, will you log an anomaly report for the Sector 3 Eastern Junction, under my name, with a note that I requested it be filed. Bryn looked at me for a long moment. You think they might not let you come back, she said. I think it's possible, I said. She nodded. Dunn and Kale, she stopped me as I turned toward the door. The gold-eyes one, do you trust her? I thought about it honestly. I think, I said slowly, that she hasn't lied to me yet. And I think that for someone who's been doing this for 400 years, choosing not to lie is a deliberate decision. Bryn considered this. All right, she said, come back. I'll try, I said. The meeting, the entrance to the Dawnless Court's territory, was not where I expected it to be. I'd expected something dramatic, a hidden door, a disguised entrance somewhere in the deep subterranean levels, something appropriately cinematic for the occasion of being escorted to a meeting with what was effectively an ancient political faction that had only recently become aware of my existence. It was a service corridor on floor 3. An actual, boring, transit authority-maintained service corridor that I had almost certainly walked past during routine maintenance checks, that appeared on the official floor maps as a secondary atmospheric regulation access, that had nothing distinctive about it except for the small mark carved into the wall beside the entry panel, worn smooth with time, nearly invisible unless you knew to look. Seraphiel touched the mark without looking at it. Habit. The panel opened. Beyond it was not a service corridor. I stepped through and the floor changed beneath my feet, older materials, something that predated the corporate construction. Stone, almost, or something that wanted to be stone. The walls curved rather than meeting at right angles. The lighting was not the blue-white transit authority panels, but something warmer and less explicable, a sourceless amber glow that seemed to come from the walls themselves. It smelled different in here, older, not unpleasant, dusty in the way that old paper smells dusty, dense with the residue of accumulated time. Stay close to me, Seraphiel said quietly. Gladly, I said. The Dawnless Court had representatives waiting in what I can only describe as a hall, though the word feels inadequate. A large chamber, carved rather than constructed, the ceiling vaulted in a way that reminded me of images I'd seen of old pre-corporate architecture. There were 4 of them seated in a loose arc on the far side of the chamber. I'm not going to describe their faces in detail. This is partly because it was difficult to look at them directly for extended periods, not because they were frightening exactly, but because the eyes do something strange with people who are very, very old. There's a depth quality that doesn't register correctly. Your visual processing keeps trying to resolve it as something familiar and failing, repeatedly, in a way that becomes mildly disorienting if you maintain it for too long. What I can tell you is that they were watching me with considerable interest. The one who spoke was seated at the center of the arc, older seeming than the others, though that was almost certainly not how it actually worked. She spoke in a language I didn't recognize for the first sentence, and then shifted to standard city dialect, precise, slightly formal, with the same careful word selection quality I'd identified in Seraphil. "You are the maintenance worker from Sector 7, she said. "Yes," I said. "And you carry residual trace from Seraphil of the Pale Accord." "Yes." "The trace reads as distinctive." She tilted her head slightly. Something moved behind her eyes. "The pattern is not thrall, not conversion, something our analysts haven't fully classified." "I've been told it's called Darville," I said. A shift in the chamber. Not dramatic. These were people who presumably practiced composure the way others practiced breathing. But a shift, genuine and small. "Seraphil," the center kin said without looking away from me, "told you the word." "She explained it," I said. "And you understand what it means." "I understand what I've been told it means," I said. "I understand that it's apparently rare. I understand that it's a biological reality, not just a cultural concept. I understand that your court picked up my resonance signature and sent someone to trace it, presumably with intentions that were not aligned with my preferences." The center kin was quiet for a moment. "Then you speak carefully." "I work in systems maintenance," I said. "Careful observation is professional habit." Something moved at the corner of her mouth. The same expression I'd identified in Seraphil, the almost smile that concedes a point. "The Darville claim," she said, returning to formality. "It's verifiable." "I'm told it is," I said. "Are you willing to undergo the resonance scan?" I looked at Seraphil standing slightly behind and to my left. She was watching me, not trying to guide my answer, just watching. "Yes," I said. The resonance scan required me to stand in the center of the chamber and be still. Seraphil stood in front of me, closer than she usually positioned herself, close enough that I could feel the cold that was always present in her, a physical fact about her, the way warmth was a physical fact about a running engine. She put both hands on my shoulders, lightly, the formal gesture she'd explained beforehand. I put my hands on hers. "Close your eyes," she said, quietly enough that it was only for me. "Find the signal." The door, I knew what she meant now. I found it. It was there the same way it had been there at 2 a.m. in my apartment, constant, low, uninsistent, pointing at her. Except now she was directly in front of me, and the direction collapsed into simple presence, and what had been a navigation signal became something more like contact. A frequency I didn't have a name for. Something that resonated at a register below the level where I had words for things. I felt her feel it too. Her hands tightened slightly on my shoulders, just slightly. We stayed like that for I don't know how long. Long enough. Long enough for whatever the dawnless court's elders were observing to observe. When we stepped back, the center kin was looking at us differently. Not with surprise, with something more complicated, a kind of careful, measured recognition. "The claim is verified," she said. The chamber was quiet. "The human is Darville to Seraphil of the Pale Accord, unclaimed by any court, affiliated by resonance, not by formal mark." She paused. "The dawnless court acknowledges the pairing. We will not approach or interfere." Seraphil inclined her head, formal, precise. "The accord is grateful," she said, in a tone that was gracious without being warm, the particular tone of intercourt diplomacy. We left through the service corridor. On the other side, back in the ordinary blue-white lighting of floor 3, Seraphil walked next to me in silence for a long moment. "That went well," I said finally. "It could have been more complicated," she said. "How?" "If they disputed the scan." "Could they have?" "Not with what they observed," she said. "No." I thought about what I'd felt during the scan, the contact, the resonance. Could you tell, I said, that it was real from your side? A long pause. Yes, she said. So you know now, I said. Whatever you believed might be true, you know it is. We were walking side by side through the floor 3 corridor, heading for the lifts. The ordinary mid-afternoon traffic of floor 3 moving around us, nobody sparing us a second glance. I knew, she said quietly, 3 weeks ago in the transit corridor, when the Venom receded. She paused. That was when I knew. The scan only gave me something to show the court. I processed this. You knew that night, I said. Yes. And you still walked away and told me to go home. You needed, she stopped, chose differently. I needed time to be certain before I said anything that couldn't be unsaid. And now you're certain. She stopped walking. We were in the middle of the floor 3 corridor, ordinary people moving around us in both directions, the ventilation system doing its constant low work, the mag rail audible somewhere above. She turned to look at me. Gold eyes in the corridor's blue-white light. I have been certain, she said quietly, since the moment I stepped back from you in that transit corridor and watched a human being absorb 4 centuries of my biological identity and simply stand there looking at me, asking what I'd done to your neck. Something that might have been a laugh almost happened in my chest. That's not a very romantic version of the story, I said. I'm not, she said with careful honesty, very good at the romantic version yet. Yet, I noted. She held my gaze. Yet, she said. Part 4, what comes after? Resolution. 6 months after the transit corridor. A lot happened in those 6 months that I'm compressing here, because some of it is still too close to tell in full, and some of it belongs to Seraphil more than to me, and I haven't asked her permission to share all of it. What I will tell you is the shape of it. The Dawnless Court's formal acknowledgement opened a door in the political sense that apparently hadn't been open in a very long time. The last formally documented Darville pairing was, according to the oldest Accord records, approximately 230 years ago. The pairing before that over a century earlier. Each one was, historically, treated as significant, a stabilizing event in some of the older texts. Something that settled certain frequencies in the kin world, the way tuning one instrument affects the resonance of others in the same space. I don't fully understand the mechanics of that. I may not ever, but I notice things differently now. The city around me has layers I can perceive that I couldn't before, not clearly, not with any resolution, but enough. The electromagnetic signature of kin presence in a corridor. The particular quality of air in a space that has been used by the kin for a long time. The low-frequency hum beneath the magrail sound on certain nights, when the courts are meeting, and their collective presence affects the city's signal environment. Seraphil calls it the secondary awakening. A gradual expansion of perception that happens in humans who are in long-term contact with a kin Darville, not conversion, not thrall, something older and more specific. I'm still human, that hasn't changed, won't change. But I'm a human with one foot, very slightly, in a different world than the one I was born into. Bryn knows all of it now. She's adjusted after her fashion. She now has a standing arrangement with Seraphil that involves Bryn flagging anomalous electromagnetic readings in the transit feeds that might indicate Dawnless Court activity, and Seraphil providing Bryn with information about certain historical events in Vale's pre-corporate history that Bryn, who has a genuine and extensive interest in urban archaeology, finds invaluable. It's a functional arrangement. It looks from the outside a lot like friendship. Neither of them has used that word. I suspect neither of them will for a long time, but I've watched it form over these 6 months, small and careful and real, and I think the word is in there waiting. The question I get asked most, when I try to explain this to the few people I trust enough to tell even parts of it, is, do I resent it? Do I resent the fact that I was walking home from a 12-hour shift, minding my own business, carrying my thermos of terrible synth coffee, thinking about nothing in particular, and a 400-year-old woman stepped out of a dark corridor and permanently altered the trajectory of my existence? It's a fair question. I'll tell you what I tell them. The bite didn't hurt. What did hurt, what was actually painful in the weeks that followed, was the adjustment, not physical. The physical recovery was inexplicably smooth, which remains medically inexplicable, and which Seraphiel has stopped trying to fully explain and started simply accepting as a fact about me. The pain was the cognitive one, the rearrangement of a worldview. The process of taking everything you believed was true about the city you lived in, and the world that city occupied, and having to lay it all out flat and rebuild it from the ground up to accommodate new information. That's painful. That takes time. But resentment assumes I was fine before, assumes the life I was living before the transit corridor was the life I was supposed to have, and that what happened to me was a derailment. I don't think it was a derailment. I think I was a loading screen, waiting. I think my body always knew something that the rest of me hadn't caught up to yet, something ancient and precise, encoded at a level deeper than decision-making. And when that something finally recognized what it had been waiting for, it simply responded. The venom receded, because my body understood it was meeting its equal. Because it had its own writing, its own record. Because I wasn't background, actually. I never was. I just didn't know it yet. The ending line. Last night Seraphiel and I stood on the observation platform of floor 22, the highest level my building access badge lets me reach, the first floor where actual atmospheric clarity becomes visible, and we watched Veil exhale. The condensation rolling off the ventilation arrays, the bioluminescent panels cycling, the magrail traffic bright in the middle distance. She was very still beside me. I was comfortable with her stillness now, in a way I hadn't been in the transit corridor, in a way I couldn't have been then. Do you know, she said, without looking away from the city, what the original Veil means, before the corporate name? No, I said. It's very old, pre-corporate, pre-merge. The language it comes from is mostly lost now. She paused. It means where the wandering ends. I looked at the city. The glow of the upper levels, the silver rivers of condensation, the slow, patient exhale of a living thing that had been here longer than anyone acknowledged. Is that why you stayed? I said. 400 years. Is that why you stayed here? She was quiet for a moment. And then she looked at me. And her gold eyes caught the bioluminescent light and held it the way they always did, warmer than the source, burning low and steady, something behind the irises that was 4 centuries old and still somehow surprised. I stayed, she said, because I was waiting for something. She didn't look away. Neither did I. And I wasn't going to leave before I found it.